All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming to us from in the world today. My name is Wyatt. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at Schwarzman Scholars, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today for another installment of our featured Spotlight series. Today, Schwarzman Search Stories. I am honored to be joined by an incredible panel of colleagues, both Schwarzman Scholars and staff, and I am so happy to turn it over to my colleague, Julia Zupko, who is our Director of Career Development, and I'll come back at the very end and give a couple of admissions updates. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, I'm Julia Zupko, and as Wyatt shared, I oversee career development at Schwarzman College. Schwarzman Search Stories is a program that we run on a regular basis at the college where we bring back alumni to speak about their search process while they were scholars, as well as their ongoing career paths. I think one of the things you should know, most importantly, we have a large group of panelists today because our scholars go off to do so many different things. Our first destinations include about 20% of the class who goes on to further education, medical school, law school, PhD. In addition, we have about 10% of the student body that goes on to either military commitments, starting their own companies, running for public office, among other endeavors, and then about 10% or 70% of the class that seeks employment. What that employment looks like around the globe can vary greatly, and we'll touch upon a lot of these different areas in today's session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and ask them to each introduce themselves and share their name, their citizenship, their current location or where they typically are, and what they're currently doing, and have them each talk just briefly about how they engaged with the career development team, and if there was a specific aspect to their post-program endeavors that they valued or brought. I think this will really highlight, again, that all scholars, no matter what their pursuits, really kind of took advantage of some of the resources that Schwarzman College provides. So with that, I'm going to share here and have us start. Nina, would you be willing to kick us off?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. I'm a US citizen. I was in the first class of Schwarzman Scholars graduating in 2017. I'm currently based in DC with the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. While I was a scholar, the Career Services was an essential resource. I had previously worked before, but not directly for the government. And the array of resources available included one-on-one coaching, which was immensely helpful for big picture strategy as well as tactical questions. And then the mentorship provided through the program, as well as opportunities to meet C-level people in industry, as well as former secretaries of the Treasury from the United States, was invaluable.
Great, thanks, Nina. Juan Sebastian?
Hi, I'm Juan Sebastian. I'm a Colombian citizen living right now in Mexico City. I'm living and working here for a company. I'm the Director of Innovation for an industrial company here in Mexico. The career office at Schwarzman was very helpful from day one. The coaching sessions were very consequential in the way I wanted to pivot my career from what I was doing before, which was this kind of similar of what I'm doing now, but at a different level. So that was very helpful. And I also got close to my mentor, which was very interesting because he was a very senior American citizen working in China with very interesting experience in Southeast Asia in general. And that was very, very interesting too. So I think that those two things were immensely helpful. And of course, all the conversations with all the diversity of our peers, all of our friends and all of the people at Schwarzman have so many different backgrounds that is just so inspiring. And I think that for me, that also got me to think a lot about what I wanted to do. So I think that was also part of, informally, the career part of the conversation for me.
Great. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I'm a Canadian citizen from Toronto, which is where I currently am now, but usually I'm based in New York City. I work for an investment firm called Temasek, which is a Singaporean firm. We do mostly direct investments, mostly in private companies, So I mostly, I guess, effectively do private equity is my main focus. In terms of the career development team at Schwarzman, I had a really positive experience here. And I actually underappreciated when I started Schwarzman the breadth of this team. I guess I came in, so to clarify, I entered the program with this job offer from Temasek. So I wasn't really looking for new opportunities. And when I came into Schwarzman at first, I thought, oh, that's the career team. They help people find opportunities. But upon conversations with several members of the career development team, I learned that there was a lot of value that and help that I could get from this team, even in my own situation. So for example, I reviewed my offer letter for my position with the career development team. We talked often about how I could maintain my relationship with Temasek throughout the year as I was sort of waiting to start my job. So this was really helpful to set me up for success, even though I already had an opportunity when I came into the program.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Capucine?
Hi, I'm Capucine or Capu, and I'm from France. I had quite a different experience because I came into the program knowing that I wanted to stay in China. So for me, I was making the most of the program in general, as well to stay in China as a vehicle for that. And the careers team really helped me do that. Currently, I'm in Swire in Hong Kong. So Swire is a Hong Kong-based conglomerate in Asia Pacific, and they have a management trainee program whereby you do rotations every 6 to 10 months, depending which company you're in. I'm in Swire Properties, and so I'm currently in my rotation in Hong Kong, but I should, hopefully, touch wood, be moving to Chengdu in 2 months to start a new rotation there, which I'm really excited about. So how the career team helped me in particular, when I started out in Schwarzman, I was setting up my Chinese CV. And even though I spoke Mandarin, CV language is a whole other realm. So it was really useful to get the team's help on that. Secondly, I think another aspect is this was my first job, and deciding what I wanted to do was a big decision, and Julia and other members helped me sort of figure it out and clarify my ideas. And lastly, more recently, even starting my job, I reached out to the career team because I had some difficulties. And so I found that very helpful, and it was lovely to be received so warmly, even though I've left Schwarzman with my worries about career journey and my current company.
Great.
So yeah.
Thanks. Rosa?
Hi everyone, I'm Rosa Allium, originally from Azerbaijan, currently based out of London. Work for BP, and I'm part of the inaugural class of Schwarzman Scholars and graduated in 2017. For me, the situation was a bit different because it's my 10th country of residency, so I've lived quite in many countries, and I was moving around, and I was in wealth management and private banking for quite a while before the program, for around 5 years, and before that I was in diplomacy. And when I came to the program, I wanted to learn about China, and it was a fascinating program. In no way I would think that I will move from wealth management to energy. And throughout the year, particularly with the mentorship program, I got a mentor who is the president of BP China. So kind of getting there, having those conversations, even without any intention of moving to BP and to the energy industry. And then having the career development program and the PTP, we have the professional training program and so on. Throughout the year, I decided, okay, I don't want to go back to Andorra and be in wealth management. I want to move to the energy sector and to be part of that transition, energy transition. And I think in terms of the mentorship, of course, there was an official mentorship by, there are official mentors within the program, but also there was a huge conversation going on, like with my peers, with the professors and so on. So I would call them unofficial mentors. And with the career development team, anything from, I even forgot how to do my CV probably back then, because already 5 years in the banking, and like helping to refresh the CV and helping to renegotiate the salary, prepare the interviews, and kind of figuring out, as an Azerbaijani citizen, it's quite challenging sometimes to relocate third country, and kind of figuring these things out and limitations and so on has been really helpful throughout the year.
Excellent. Bridget?
Hi everyone, so my name's Bridget, obviously. I'm an Australian citizen and I'm currently based in Singapore, working for Oliver Wyman, who are a management consultancy firm. So I suppose for me, I came into the program with 5 or 6 years of working experience, and I came from sport and sort of community engagement, so very much more the social sector side of things. And my broad intention was to try and understand, to try and get into a job in the corporate sector more broadly, knowing that I do one day want to head back to the social or government sector, but I saw this as a good opportunity, which led me to when Oliver Wyman actually came to the campus to visit and presented. Just got a really good feeling for, I suppose, who they were as a firm generally, and also how we kind of operate in Singapore, which gave me a direct contact with a woman named Rebecca, who was the recruiter. And through that, I then was able to really understand the process of applying for Oliver Wyman and what it's like here in Singapore. Also, my husband lives here, so he's Australian too, but I came to visit him and then could go into the office here and various things like that. So really good networking opportunity in that way. But then in terms of the careers office itself, certainly the coaching was really important, because like I mentioned, I had a bit of a thesis on what I wanted to do post-program, but in terms of how I really shaped that and what jobs I did apply for in my in-time kind of search whilst at the college, that was really helpful, even just to help me reach out to my former networks to help me understand why I was going down the path I was. I think the careers team were really good at helping me pull all the resources around to do that. But then also just things that I found really helpful were the GLCC network, so the kind of different resources that we had. I don't understand the language of corporate world as well as I did the social world, so just in things like CVs, cover letters, various things, as Rizal mentioned, a similar kind of experience to work with the careers team on that. So I think that's sort of broadly was just very helpful across the year. To definitely think about how I was going to apply. The actual application process also helped me with kind of negotiating my contract or my kind of offer letter as well. So all of those practical things were super helpful from the careers team too.
Great, thanks, Bridget. Zach?
Hello, everybody. I am the one on the panel who is still in school, so I'm at Stanford right now, but repping the swag from last year. Engagement building. So my background in kind of grassroots work, and I've been out of school a while. So I think I came in having decided 2 weeks before I left for China that I was going to apply to law school, which I don't recommend approaching the process to anybody else that way. But that meant that I had to do things like take the LSAT from Beijing and figure out that process pretty rapidly abroad. And I think Schwarzman was incredibly helpful in 3 ways. One was just generally giving some coaching and advice, since I wasn't a senior in college surrounded by people who might be applying to law school and med school and business school. It was actually really helpful to just get a reminder of how I should be approaching that, thinking through the different parts of the application. Second was, direct input on figuring out things like writing my essays for application. But then the third one that I really just want to echo what Juan said, which is that the community overall is incredibly helpful and supportive. So it sort of felt like I had 142 extra career counselors baked in with my classmates, some of whom had gone to law school or business school or had PhDs in education already, and could help me think through sort of what made sense for my next step.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. What I'd love to do now is get to know our audience a little bit better. So I'm going to launch a poll just to get a sense of our group out there today. It's an anonymous poll, but it gives us as folks today a little bit of an idea of where you're all coming from and your interests. Can my panelists see the numbers? No. Okay.
No.
Great. I'll just make sure to share that. About 10 more seconds and I'll close the poll. Okay. So today on our call, the majority of attendees are coming from Asia, quickly followed up by Europe and North America, with a few folks, about 10% from Africa, and just under 5% from Latin America, South America, Caribbean, and Oceania. Then when we talk about who's in our audience with respect to years of full-time work experience, about 60% have that 0 to 1 years, about a quarter have 2 to 3 years, and about 10 to 15% have 4 to 8 years work experience. The sector, about just over 50% are interested in pursuing maybe more of a for-profit corporation, company kind of type of sector interests. About 15% NGO, nonprofit, and then about 30% government or other public institution. Thanks for sharing. It's great to have you all here. I think we'll be able to touch on a lot of those things today. I'm going to start with Nina. Nina, you mentioned that you're currently in Washington, D.C. I think, how did you share a little bit more about the specifics of how you were in Asia, kind of trying to go back to DC to network, to pursue government, staying focused on that government sector when I'm sure there were plenty of other options that were available over the course of the year. So maybe share with us just a little bit more about those aspirations and how you pursued the year.
So I'm going to echo some of what I've heard other folks say already, which is that the experience of being in the Schwarzman College community with a lot of people thinking through the best way to have an impact and the best way to use their skills was immensely helpful for broader thinking about what are my values, where in my gut do I feel like would be the right place for me to plug in after this year. So I did know that I wanted to work in public policy. My thesis was that going to work on Capitol Hill could be a good possibility, but I wanted to test out that thesis a bit. So I had a whole bunch of conversations. And again, the Career Services Office was helpful for thinking through, again, which networks do I already have in place? Who can I circle back with versus who do I need to reach out to cold or through other people to learn more and get a better sense of what the jobs actually look like, what sorts of people do the jobs, and why do they do them? What do they find rewarding? What are the challenges? And so something unique about the Capitol Hill work environment is that it's a unique job environment. Unpaid internships are usually the main entry point, and it's a very in-person job market where you don't apply in October, sign an offer, and then go the next July. It's much more, okay, an office needs somebody, and then you start on Monday. So it's a bit of an a just-in-time hiring approach. So one thing that I chose to do was I had conversations virtually while I was in Beijing, but then for Chinese New Year, which was about halfway through the year, I chose to return to the United States. And I met with people in DC in person who I'd had phone calls with or emailed with in order to put a face to the name and get an on-the-ground feel. And then after the program, I returned to DC with another job that I was doing in the evenings and weekends to pay the bills, but then had a bunch of informational interviews in person started with an unpaid fellowship opportunity on the Hill, and then that turned into a full-time job, and then from a full-time job and on Capitol Hill, it's easier to get the next full-time job. But I think throughout all of this, something that was really important to me was hearing people talk about how you get a lot of advice, you get a lot of input, you have an open mind and think about the things that you're learning through the year and how that may or may not impact your working thesis about what you want to do. But then at the end of the day, trusting your intuitions and knowing when something feels right.
Great. Thanks, Nina. Juan Sebastian, you came in with some work experience. You were really contemplating whether or not to return to your previous employer, but I know you wanted to maintain that connection with China. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigated kind of returning to your previous employer, but also how you made sure to utilize kind of China over the course of the year, how that fit in with your professional interests, how maybe the capstone, again, had an impact?
Okay, well, for me, I was very interested in the industrial kind of world of China. And coming from Colombia and Latin America, I think that the idea of a country that was rapidly developing and that had that sort of dichotomy of growth and social pressure also was very interesting. And that was kind of from day one, I wanted to be kind of sort of consequential with the decisions that I was making in the program on my capstone, the mentors that sort of I was trying to look, the places that I was trying to visit. I was trying to sort of learn more about the industrial sort of development of China and sexy side of business that happened in China and that is part of the growth of the country. And that was also part of the experience that I had back in Colombia. I was working for an industrial company and I wanted to sort of be part of that conversation in the company that I'm working right now, but I wanted to be in the innovation side of that. And of course, there is not that much innovation in the industrial world, at least in Latin America, or not as much as we could expect. Or we might expect. So I was very interested in that. And I was trying to be very consequential on my capstone, on the conversation that I was having, on the places that I was visiting. And that helped me a lot, sort of going back with my employer and sort of navigating the idea of coming back to the job, but with this new position of innovation, which we didn't have in the company. So that was very, very interesting. And that was kind of the experience for me.
Excellent. Rebecca, you shared a lot with us about the fact that you had an opportunity coming in, but I know that you had some longer term interests as well, kind of in impact investing and thinking through kind of what those approaches might be globally. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you explored that area during your time at Schwarzman College?
Sure. So for those that are unfamiliar with the term impact investing, I'll just start by defining that as investments that seek to generate a return that is beyond a financial return, whether it's social or environmental, but some sort of measurable impact beyond just a financial return on your invested capital. So I became really interested in that throughout college, through some internships, during summer times, and came into Schwarzman with the goal of learning more about a career path in impact investing. I decided that the first step would be going into this more commercial finance position where I am now with Temasek, so that I could learn finance skills and ultimately apply those to an impact investing setting in the longer term, just for context there. But Julia, to your question about how I was able to explore impact investing throughout the year, I think, first of all, having an offer when I came into Schwarzman Scholars reset my priorities for the year. And I think that it enabled me to focus on that long-term development because I didn't need to focus on what's the immediate next step. So in terms of ways that I did that, I was able to actually write my capstone project which is a large written project or research project that scholars complete towards the end of their year, I wrote my capstone on impact investing in China. And I was able to interact with various impact investors in China and write essentially 3 case studies on different impact investment firms in China. So I think it was very helpful to have the chance to focus on not what's my immediate next step, but where do I see myself going after that next step? Because what I'm doing now, I see as sort of a stepping stone to what I ultimately want to be doing longer term. And then I think the other consequence of having an offer when I came into the program was that I was also able to tailor my year towards preparing for that immediate next step as well, in a sense, in that I, for example, attended the Singapore deep dive where some of our Singaporean scholars hosted a week-long trip to Singapore, which was relevant for me because the firm I work for now is a Singaporean firm. So that gave me a great introduction to the country.
Great. Kapu, conversely, you were looking for that next right fit opportunity with the goal of staying in China. Can you talk a little bit about how you pursued the various opportunities in China, both with, you went to Swire, which was a kind of a campus-based opportunity, but you also looked and spent time looking at all other options off campus and kind of exploring the network more broadly. Will you share a little bit more on that perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I was very uncertain of what I wanted to do, which meant I had to do a lot of exploring. So in terms of Swire and more on-campus opportunities, so programs that have a structure like a management trainee program, I think the GLCC and the career talks at Schwarzman really helped because you just need to check it, but it's kind of done for you in terms of seeing the opportunities. I think what was slightly more, you have to be more active and proactive about is when you're looking for opportunities like startups, like VC, and things that might not necessarily have a program, which are actually the majority of opportunities. And so for that, the mentorship was useful. I met a few interesting people who weren't necessarily my mentors, but there are networking sessions within Schwarzman. And so that was useful. I also did a PPT. I don't know if you still call it that, but the internship throughout the year. And I did one in an accelerator, which I chose to do because it connected me to a breadth of startups and different companies, as well as venture capitals. And so it helped me meet different types of companies within that industry, which was a major industry that I was exploring. And then again, to echo what people said, talking to fellow scholars helps you sort of figure out what you might want to do. And there are also chats with like WeChat groups within Schwarzman that are career focused. So people post opportunities that their company has or that they know of. And one opportunity that I pursued quite far down actually came from one of those chats, simply from someone knowing someone else who was looking for a hire at a company that might interest me. So there's a wealth of tools that you can use when you're really looking for that immediate next step.
Great, thanks. Rosa, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about finding and pursuing an opportunity in a third country, one in which you weren't necessarily educated or a citizen of, but also specifically, I've seen a lot of questions come through now about making a career change. So this idea that you kind of went from private wealth to energy, if you could speak to that as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Maybe I'll start with that. So that year in Schwarzman College, for me, in my mind, when I look about it, especially when we were the first cohort as well, is the big toolbox, and you just pick whatever you want to pick out of that year. And as when we mentioned, and I mentioned, I had an amazing experience with a mentorship, for example, and that was probably primary reason why I decided to change. And because before when I was thinking about energy industry, I was more angry. And then when I realized, while talking to my mentor, the head of the BP China, and then it opens a lot of doors. I had a great lunch, for example. One day, like a lot of senior executives would come from BP central headquarters to China, and I had a great lunch. And I just was angry and just throw all my angry questions to the chief economist of BP. And the way that he was answering and kind of the logic and so on, kind of like really throughout the year, I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. Oh, maybe I can actually be part of that transformation and transition to more sustainability. And I became a kind of sustainability champion of BP right now. And I really believe in that. But I think also, like the kind of personal touch of the connections with mentorships, it's much more than just the professional kind of regular checking in and saying, oh, hi, I was very much happy when my mentor invited me for New Year's Eve to come to her home and meet her family and her friends. And up until now, we have bi-monthly catch-ups and the directions we do. But I think also, kind of thinking not only about me and my great experience, but also about my colleagues. There's I remember there was some CEO of a big tech company who was visiting to give a lecture in our college. And one of my scholars approached him after the event and said, oh, do you mind if are you interested in me becoming your EA? An absolutely bold kind of statement. And the guy was like, yeah, of course, sure. So I don't know if he's still working. I think pretty much he's still working for him. So back from one kind of conversation that you can have without those bureaucratic walls, it really helps to build that relationship. And as a couple mentioned as well, peer-to-peer help. I personally am very happy, lucky that I've seen some opportunities which helped, WeChat groups to kind of link some people put two and two together and make, the project go ahead or, find some jobs. And the same for another of my colleagues. And kind of coming back to the question of third world country moving as well, it's going to be very interesting times. Of course, it was one of the largest challenges for me. There were so many opportunities in the US, for example, back when I was in college, which I would have loved to go to, but then there are those limitations on visa and permanent residency and all kind of things. But it's been very helpful, as I say, those kind of access to and communication with the mentors, and then through the mentors to the headhunters and to the HR has been really helpful in that regard. But when we think about it going forward, post-COVID, post-virus, I think it will be when people will be working from home mostly and remotely. It's an amazing, I think the biggest strength there is the networking and relationships rather than your passport and your limitations on permanent residency and work permits. So I think that exposure to the very wide array of network, be it in governance, be it in politics, be it in businesses, people can get through the college. And then even though you cannot physically, for example, for me personally, it takes a lot of time to go and move to the US now that I'm in the UK. But I think the future of workforce will be more on the remote work, co-working, where you can build on that.
Great. Bridget, similarly, you've made a career change as well. Can you share a little bit more about kind of how you explored various opportunities, how maybe having more years of work experience kind of played into maybe choices you made or things you thought about?
Yeah, certainly. So as I kind of broadly alluded to, I worked in sort of sport and community engagement prior to Schwarzman, and it was quite niche what I did in terms of it was Australian football, if there are any Australians on the line, AFL, and really it was using sport as a vehicle for sort of social change initiatives, be it around racial inclusion or gender diversity. There were various different things that we worked on. I was also part of a not-for-profit arm of a football club essentially, and what I saw in that experience over the years that I was there, and by the time I left, I was in a role as manager of diversity and inclusion. But I kind of sat across the football club, the for-profit business, and the not-for-profit, and we did a lot of work with government as well. So it was a truly multi-sectorial approach to social change and to community engagement. So that working experience, it was fantastic. I loved it. I was very passionate about what I was doing. But the part of that puzzle that I understood the least was probably the more for the profit side of things, the business side of things. So I wanted, I suppose, really to get a better understanding broadly across any type of business sector, because there are a lot of businesses, a lot of big corporations who are increasingly interested in diversity and interested in having an impact. But one of the things that I found on the community side was that often there was a very limited understanding of what their money could actually do at the grassroots level. But I kind of wasn't able to communicate that across to them because I didn't really understand their kind of way of operating, or even just, I've said it before, but language is a huge thing. Just their language, to be able to have a conversation, is really, really important in those spaces. So yeah, I think having all of that and then coming into Schwarzman, it was about then very broadly opening up to, I keep saying just, business, but I think consulting therefore is something where you get very, you're on project-based work. So I've worked in the past 8 months on, for a couple of different banks, for a health promotion organization, in some sort of green finance type stuff. So it's really, really varied. So it's a very quick paced, fast learning kind of environment. And that was part of why I chose this path. Yeah, and I think everyone has said this, but also I think the other scholars were super helpful. I should point that out. There were others who had consulting experience or, had done casing before. This was all totally new to me, really, really brand new, and also a bit scary as a sort of 28-year-old going into a brand new industry. There were definitely times in the interview process, and to be honest, still have been times in the job where I feel incredibly humbled, and it has been really challenging at times. But I think the Schwarzman experience has made me see the benefit of, a bit like Becca, taking a step into an area that I know has purpose for my future.
Great. Seth, you had a little bit of a different experience at the college with kind of the goal of an academic post-program pursuit. Can you talk a little bit about how that may have kind of shaped how the year looked, maybe again, your interest in education and law, and again, what that experience was like during your time there?
Definitely. I think one thing that just colored the entire year for me was that I wasn't actively looking for a job. And so that both meant that freed up time that I would have spent trying to figure out where I wanted to be working and what I wanted to be doing and meeting the people necessary to do that. It also meant that I wasn't actively engaged in that sort of networking, which I think some people found they started networking looking for a job, and that led to other sorts of opportunities. So for me, it allowed me to focus more on the other aspects of the experience instead. I was definitely very interested in how China did education. So I wrote my capstone project on that, got to visit a few schools while I was there, and also just learn from the experiences of students from Schwarzman and Tsinghua about what their educational experiences had been like. I'm interested in long-term helping work with education reform in the United States, and China was just such a different and interesting perspective of how they approach what school is and what it's for and what it's preparing people for. So for me, I think that was almost more intellectual, and it comes into play now when whether I'm working on a coronavirus pro bono research project on the legal side and thinking about what I know about the legal system in China and how incentives work for policymakers there as opposed to the United States. It's this incredibly fascinating counterpoint to how we operate, or thinking about how do we do testing and distance learning and what's the school environment in the United States compared to this very different perspective. So I think for me, it became much more about that immersive learning experience and being able to draw while I'm in school, intellectually on that perspective. And then I'm sure it'll continue to be helpful once I'm back out into the real world.
Excellent. Well, now it's time for us to open up to questions from our audience. Please use that Q&A feature. And I guess I just would like to highlight the fact that this panel so far is really emblematic of how many different options and interests a Schwarzman scholar can have and still be successful and really engaged with the program. So again, hopefully you've gotten a flavor of what all those different kind of perspectives can be and what it would be like to have all of these kinds of different individuals with different interests from different geographies around you every day. But with Wyatt, do you have some specific questions that have come through the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Julie, and thanks everyone. This is just so incredible to hear everyone's perspectives and insights and wisdom. And Julia, one question I'd love to hear you start with from the career development perspective, and then anyone jump in, is about internships with the program. As you may know, we initially, when the program started for the first few years, we required that as part of what we call the PTP, that a few scholars mentioned, the practical training project, which was an internship as a required element of the program, to offer a bit more flexibility for however scholars want to maximize the experience. That's an optional part of the program now, but a lot of scholars do elect to find an internship. So I'd love to hear about that from your perspective in the Career Development Office, Julia, and then for any of you who want to talk about your internship experience while at Schwarzman College.
Absolutely. So in any given year, about 200 different internship or project-based opportunities are promoted through the college and our existing network of employer relationships across myriad sectors. So there's always kind of the opportunity to review and see those opportunities that have been formally posted. But as you heard from a lot of our panelists today, a lot of people through the mentor network, the peer network, and other places, just personal interests, were able to self-source opportunities that are of specific interest to them. And I think that is kind of an equally important thing to kind of pursue and think about. In addition, we sometimes have formal programs. So for example, this spring, Plug and Play China, which is an incubator that is helping a lot of Chinese startups consider going abroad with respect to their endeavors. They came to us and said, we'd love to partner with the Schwarzman Scholars Program and see if there are any scholars who can work with our startups. So about 15 to 18 different startups that were based out of Plug and Play China asked for scholar support in helping them reach their goals. And so we have a group of students and alumni working on those projects this spring. So a lot of different things kind of arise with respect to project-based opportunities during the year. And again, even the Plug and Play China example most recently, that example is really being done remotely this spring. In addition, we just had a great opportunity between a joint venture between NetEase and Mattel that runs their mobile gaming for things like Uno, Phase 10, things like that, post 2 opportunities in marketing and policy, again, for remote opportunities this upcoming year. So again, lots of things kind of come through the pipeline, and equally, I think a lot of students kind of source various opportunities based on their personal interests.
Great. Thanks, Julian. Does anyone, one or two people, want to jump in and talk about internship experience during that year at Schwarzman College? Bridget?
I'm happy to.
Great.
So I did my internship at the Australian Consulate in the Culture and Communications division, and it was actually, I worked on a number of initiatives around communicating to Chinese audiences about Australian football, because there is usually an annual game every year that happens in China, but also about Indigenous Australia, because I had previously studied and worked in the Indigenous Australian affairs as well. So I suppose it was just a good example really of that, what I was talking about earlier about a kind of multi-sector, or like a diverging between my general interests. That was a really interesting and good one to be able to do whilst in China as well, because it was yeah, about communicating to a totally different audience about things that are incredibly uniquely Australian. But also I think somebody asked a sort of a question about the flexibility of it. I chose to do it toward the end of the year when majority of our academic requirements were satisfied, and so I was sort of there about 3 or 4 days a week, which I quite enjoyed, because by that stage I kind of missed working, and so I liked the kind of routine of getting out of the college and heading out to go to my internship. So just for a little insight into the logistics of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Bridget. So another question that's come in thinking back to when you were in these attendees' shoes, so when you were thinking about applying to the Schwarzman Scholars Program. Our application is now open until September 22nd. And we had a great question about when you think about your application, how much did you focus on your career ambitions in your application to Schwarzman Scholars, and how have you seen that play out now post-program as you reflect back on your application? Juan Sebastian, do you want to jump in there and give us some insight and encouragement for these students who are thinking about applying to the program?
From day one of the application, and I was a bit obsessed, to be honest, like writing my application, doing like everything like properly. And then, like the first interview in New York was very exciting. I think that, and I was reading a lot about China. Of course I knew about China, but I was like 6 months even before like sending the application, I was reading a lot about China, sort of trying to understand what was going on in that side of the world, and getting myself sort of immersed in that. So for me, it was a very exciting moment. I was thinking about sort of debating between going back to the US to do like a master's degree there, or like exploring something else. And this program was just, it was amazing. I mean, I was very, very happy that I got into the program from day one, like being in Beijing, sort of like all the expectations, the ups and downs of the program, and everything was a very interesting experience. And I was I put a lot of work on my application. Maybe I was a bit obsessed. I don't know if that's the right sort of position. I wasn't looking too much in the sort of the career-oriented sort of narrative of why China. I was very honest of my genuine interest of being in China, of sort of exploring as a Colombian this part of the world that was completely new for me, and that echoed in the application, I guess, and in the interviews. And I was very sort of putting a lot of work on the application, but I was very sort of honest of why I wanted to be there, and sort of my candid way of just exploration.
Kapu, I'd love for you to maybe chime in on this one too. I get this question a lot about, what if I don't know exactly what I want to do? Should I just, in my application, pretend like I'm super focused and I know exactly what I want? Or how can I talk about kind of maybe the themes around the things I'm interested in? And you mentioned earlier that you weren't quite sure exactly what you wanted to do. So how did you think about approaching the application?
So I had quite an interesting experience, because one of my, at the time we had to do a leadership essay, and one of the things that I was leading, which I spoke about in the leadership essay, was a careers society actually that encouraged people at London School of Economics to go into non-traditional careers, which tended to be the obsession there. And so I think it was fairly obvious from that I wasn't sure what I was going into. But even in the personal statement, I never gave any precise idea. I sort of said, I'm interested in this aspect of business, but I'm also interested in this aspect of public policy. And I think the interviewers and the people reading the application know that at where I was at that time, they don't expect you to know exactly what you want to do with your life. And it showed in the interview questions, because none of them asked me, what career do you want to pursue after Schwarzman, or not even anything similar to that. So I'd say I really wouldn't worry if you're not sure. I think suggest your interests maybe, because I mean, it's good to show that you have interests, and of course, that they want to see who you are, which interests play a role in that, but I wouldn't worry too much.
Great, thank you so much. Julia, a quick question for you from the career development perspective as well. How do you see it, the balance every year of students who come in with next steps kind of in place already, and those who actually go through the recruitment process at Schwarzman College, knowing that it obviously changes with every cohort?
Yeah, about 20 to 25% of students come in with a post-program option on the table. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of exploration that happens. I think another 10 to 20% are kind of in an application process as they weigh different alternatives, continuing education versus maybe continuing with their startup or again, pursuing employment. And then again, I would say the majority of individuals, again, are exploring and pursuing. One of the unique things about Schwarzman College being a one-year degree program, and because we admit our class so early, we actually start working with our incoming class from a career development perspective 8 to 10 months prior to matriculation. This is really important because there are some options that are more things like maybe consulting or things like those management trainee programs that do have a much earlier recruiting cycle. And they recruit early and they recruit for a big class, and that's kind of it. So you can't really decide in January that that's an option you want to pursue. It becomes a little bit more challenging at that point. But by starting, again, 8 to 10 months pre-matriculation and starting to figure out what it is you want to focus on, if some of those more formalized hiring practices of our interest, we can get you kind of prepared and on that pathway. So we provide a lot of resources and webinars and materials during that kind of 8 to 10 months. So I think those are just some things to kind of consider and be aware of as you think about pursuits.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. And then one more broad question, and then we'll turn it back to you, Julia, to wrap us up. And if we don't have time to get to your question, there will certainly be the opportunity to follow up, and I'll let you know how to do that in just a bit. But a couple questions came in about other backgrounds, such as marketing, media, healthcare, for scholars coming into the program and their path after that. So I'd love to hear any examples of scholars that colleagues that you know of, or Julia, from your perspective as well.
I'll touch on the healthcare one just as an example, but I'd love for some of our scholars who have so many peers and alumni friends who can speak to some of these things as well. The diversity of the program and the diversity of interests are incredible. So we have had a couple doctors in the program, some of whom have gone back to practicing medicine, for example, and some have made switches into applying their medical expertise in other areas, such as investments. Someone who went to work for their embassy in China to work on a collaboration between two different countries cross-border around health initiatives. We've had people who are interested in health systems who've done work, for example, educated and work in the US, focused on healthcare while they were in China, and then subsequently went to work for a health system in Singapore. We have other individuals who had backgrounds, for example, in drug policy in the United States, who subsequently went to work for a pharmaceutical company, a multinational based out of China. So again, you can just, I think that's the beauty of this program and why I love coming to work every day, because each individual has really kind of different backgrounds, different interests, and really we can then shape each year based on those individual interests. But I think that also requires the individual coming to the program to not kind of sit back and say, well, what's going to be provided? The person does have to have enough intrinsic motivation to say, this is what I'm excited about. This is what I want to learn more about. How can we identify and work together to brainstorm and pursue those kinds of passions that each individual may have? Can anyone else on the panel speak to some of the things, other sectors that they heard people pursue, or other backgrounds that they might have found interesting?
Maybe I can just add a couple of examples which I found fascinating. From our cohort, there was so some of the scholars. There was one who was very much interested in marketing and media, and he did a video of traveling around China and dancing, and after that his kind of passion was creativity and video, and he followed up as well after that, and he was in the marketing. There was, from the other cohort, there was a scholar who is a composer, and she was kind of combining the European and Chinese music together, and her stories kind of bring the peace and kind of understanding, communication through the music. And I know that after that as well, it's totally different. It's not, as you rightly mentioned, why it's like, it's not economics, it's not politics, it's not even health or military, but it's totally different angle to look at how you can build those bridges between the nations.
Well said, well said. Julia, I'm gonna turn it back to you to wrap us up with a final question for our Schwarzman Scholars panelists.
Our time has passed too quickly today, but I'd love to kind of go through our panelists for maybe one last thought. It could be something about how essentially the Schwarzman College experience has impacted your life today, whether that's something about China, whether that's something about, again, we are a leadership program, global affairs, so something maybe that from the experience has really impacted something you've had post-program. Nina? Would you mind starting us off?
Absolutely. Something that I was really struck by in the program was the real opportunity to work on clearly communicating across cultural differences in cultural backgrounds, as well as differences in industry backgrounds, interest backgrounds, academic backgrounds. And I think that that's a skill that serves you well in every context following Schwarzman, but the opportunity to not only be in class with a whole bunch of scholars from very different experiences, but also work with them collaboratively on different extracurricular projects, both related to people's interests and also related to like non-professional passions. So for example, working on the Schwarzman women community with a bunch of women who all are doing very different things with their lives and want to do very different things with their lives, but figuring out how to find common ground and communicate clearly with each other and identify where there are meaningful differences in opinion versus the things that are maybe just distinctions without a difference about just based on people's different experiences going in.
Great. Juan Sebastian?
I'm sort of the guy in the room who's always having an opinion on China these days here in Mexico, in Colombia. And it feels very, like I feel very fortunate to be able to relate to so many stories in China, to be able to be critical about, you know, issues that are happening and to have an opinion, like an informed opinion and you know, like relate that to the geography, to the people, to the history of China. And that's something that, you know, like even if you read about it, even if you know, like if you're very cognizant about like any topic, it just happens when you travel to those places and visit those places and live in those places that you can actually have a grasp on different topics. So I mean, the ways the program has impacted me are like in so many ways, but one of the things that I feel very fortunate is that at least here in Mexico and in Colombia, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about China and about current sort of affairs of China and Southeast Asia in general. And this is, of course, I mean, it's obvious, but it's such an important part of our history and our planet that I feel very fortunate to have sort of an informal opinion on China and being the guy in the room who's always sort of having something to say about my experience there.
Great, thanks. Becca?
So because I work for a Singaporean investment firm, we actually have a pretty significant presence in China as well in our investment portfolio. So having a year of experience in China has been really helpful in a couple ways. First of all, it's helped me connect with my Singaporean and Chinese colleagues. I remember at the beginning of my job, I did 1 month of training, and some of our new colleagues from China were in training as well. I was actually sitting next to someone who had just graduated from Tsinghua as well. So we were like bonding over our shared alma mater. That was pretty unique. And then as well, from a more business or investment perspective, we talk a lot in our firm about how the world is changing, how the relationship between the US and China is changing. And for me, being able to participate in those conversations in what I hope comes across as a thoughtful way because of my experience in China has been hopefully helpful in terms of moving those discussions forward and our investment views. And also for me as a very junior member of this team, an opportunity to show an area in which I, relative to some of my American colleagues in my office, have some experience that they don't have because they didn't live in China for a year. So that's been a cool opportunity as well for me.
Great, thank you. Kapu?
I'm going to represent the people who are still in China, which, I mean, the Schwarzman year was invaluable, and I very much wanted to return to mainland China when starting off in Hong Kong. And it is as simple as I would not be able to without Schwarzman, not only because it's given me a master's, which enables me to get the visa when borders reopen, hopefully. It pushed me to ask for what I wanted, which I don't think a year beforehand I would have done. And it has given me the base of Chinese that I need to work in the language. And so all of those things are what Schwarzman has given me in the career aspect, I would say.
Great, thank you so much. Zal?
Very briefly, I think one of the greatest assets that I will keep as a big asset is that I will always be the Tsinghua alumni and the Schwarzman alumni, and it's with you forever. And you know, the amount of times when on a weekly basis when I talk to people, no matter, I cover Africa based out of London, but because we have subcontractors in China and stuff, the amount of time when we talk to them and this icebreaker, and whenever they hear the Tsinghua, they're like, oh my, today in the morning, they're like, oh my God, Tsinghua, no way, you were living in Beijing and so on. So I think this kind of an asset that you have, and it's with you, and it's kind of growing, and China will always be there. It's sustainability, I talk about it a bit, and the network that access has always been, and I think will be the greatest asset for it.
Great, thanks. Bridget?
Yeah, so prior to Schwarzman, I had literally lived in a 5-kilometer radius my whole life. My high school, my university, and my first workplace were all also within about a 6-kilometer radius. So I think, you know, to then, I'd obviously traveled a fair bit, but to live in China was just a super unique experience. And the college and the program just made that incredibly possible. As someone who doesn't speak much Chinese, I learned as much as I could whilst I was there. Just logistically, it would have been impossible. But then the really nice thing, I think, now to my kind of current life is twofold. It's when I went back to Australia, it's walking through my own city with a new appreciation for the Chinese community in Australia and in Melbourne particularly. So be it in terms of food, language, you know, recognizing characters, hearing people speak and understanding a little bit of what they're saying. They were all like incredibly amazing things that kind of changed the way I now see the place that I just mentioned. I've very much grown up in, but also in Singapore, as Becca mentioned, there's a you know, strong China-Singapore connection, but also again in terms of like food and language and talking to different people at hawker centers in tiny bits of Mandarin. It's just really fun on an interpersonal kind of perspective. It's yeah, really fun and feels, you feel really kind of gratified to have that different level of connection very much outside my own backyard.
Great, thanks. Seth?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the people. And I think Rosa is spot on when he talks about the alumni, but also the experience of living with and getting to know everybody during the year. I mean, there's nothing like Schwarzman on the face of the planet where you're that in such a tight, diverse cohort. So, you know, whether that's the friend who was traveling from the East Coast to go visit Bridget and stopped off in California right before the world shut down, or catching up with Kapu just a few days ago and feeling very jealous that Hong Kong was opening up and she could start going to restaurants. But just hearing, you know, what things are like for family back home in France and her life in Hong Kong, and feeling that incredible community and having a finger on the pulse of things going on in so many different countries and so many different fields is just really special.
Thank you to all of our panelists today. I think you brought to life more than I ever could really what this experience is like, and the benefits of the opportunities, and how, as people think about post-program endeavors, and again, the mission of the program to kind of be connections across borders really is manifested. So thanks again for all of our panelists' time today, and thank you for joining us. Wyatt, anything else to close?
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Julia. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Julia, for leading us today. This has been incredible, and I know very insightful and valuable for all of our attendees. Just a couple of reminders from the admissions team. If you are a passport holder from Chinese mainland, Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan, our application will be closing on May 20th. So have a few days left to get your application in. If you are a US global applicant, our application is open until September 22nd. Interviews will then take place in late October, early November. We are here to help as the admissions team, and we have lots of other opportunities to engage with Schwarzman Scholars as you work on your application. We have a series of feature spotlight series just like this one coming up over the summer, as well as things like application walkthroughs, application workshop, and information session and Q&As, and opportunities to engage with scholars and our team as well. So we would love for you to keep in touch with us. Please email us at any point at admissions@schwarzmanscholars.org. We look forward to staying connected. Thank you again for joining us today. Thanks again to our panelists, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.